By late 1916, everyone agreed on one thing. The empire was nosediving into disaster with alarming pace. So that naturally meant one thing: Rasputin had to go. Most didn't even have this on the radar. Not the workers, not the peasants, but the aristocracy did, which, historically, tends to be the final. The very people who had spent years sneering at the revolutionaries now found themselves whispering the same thought over brandy and candlelight. If this continues, the monarchy will not survive. Rasputin had become radioactive. Ministers came and went at his suggestion. Appointments were mocked, policies reversed overnight. The war was going badly, food was disappearing, and the empress, isolated, foreign, and convinced she alone understood God's will, trusted one man above all others. The court was convinced that as long as Rasputin lived, Alexandra would listen to no one else. So they decided to save the monarchy by committing murder. Leading the plot was Prince Felix Yusupov, fabulously wealthy, deeply bored, and married to the Tsar's niece. He was joined by Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, Nicholas's cousin and low-key Yusupov's lover. Maybe. Along with a handful of officers and politicians who all believed they were about to become heroes. They were wrong. Yusupov himself, later in life, loved nothing more than to recount this night to anybody that would listen. The story goes, on the night of December 16th, 1916, Rasputin was lured to Yusupov's palace under the guise of meeting Felix's wife. Down in the basement, they offered him cakes and wine laced with cyanide. Rasputin ate the cakes. He drank the wine. He did not die, which, to be fair, immediately unsettled everyone. Panicking, Yusupov shot him. Rasputin fell. They thought it was over. It wasn't. Rasputin got up. At this point, the story veers sharply into nightmare. Bleeding, wounded, and furious, Rasputin staggered into the courtyard, where he was shot again and again. Finally, they beat him, bound him, and threw his body into the Neva River, where Rasputin would drown, allegedly. Even in death, he refused to behave. Whether this account is 100% true or not, it doesn't matter. The myth was already stronger than the man. Rasputin had warned them what would happen if he died this way. By then, Russia was past the point of listening to warnings. The conspirators expected gratitude. They imagined medals, relief, a grateful Tsar. Instead, Alexandra was devastated. She collapsed. She raged. She blamed everyone but Rasputin. Nicholas was furious, not because Rasputin was gone, but because members of his own family had taken justice into their own hands. The murderers were punished gently, exiled, reassigned, removed from court. The message was clear. The monarchy had learned nothing. Rasputin's death did not save the regime, it stripped it of its last illusion. Because if even the aristocracy was now murdering its own advisers in secret basements, then order was already gone. And the people noticed. The rumors didn't stop, the war didn't improve, the bread didn't return. And now the empire was heading into winter without its scapegoat. With Rasputin gone, there was no one left to blame. Only the Tsar, and the Empress, and the system itself. While Nicholas was off at the front, attempting to inspire the army, the women of the Romanov family were doing what they could to hold things together. During the war, the Romanov daughters were not hidden away. Olga and Tatiana trained as nurses, working long shifts in military hospitals. They cleaned wounds, assisted surgeries, sat with men who were dying far from home, boys barely older than they were, broken by shells and infections and fear. Soldiers adored them, not because they were princesses, but because they were young, kind, and painfully human in a world of blood and screams. They talked to the men, wrote letters home for them, held hands when there was nothing else to do. Maria and Anastasia visited hospitals too, bringing food, telling jokes, distracting men who had lost too much to remember how to smile. It was one of the last things the public genuinely liked about the Romanovs. Alexandra watched this and tried to follow their example. This was a mistake. When the Empress appeared publicly in a Red Cross nurse's uniform, revolutionary propaganda seized the opportunity. Around the same time, a Red Cross supply van was looted. The uniforms were taken, not for scandal, but because poor women needed clothes. Many of them were prostitutes. Photographs were circulated. Alexandra in her nurse's uniform, women in stolen uniforms. The implication was obvious. The truth was irrelevant. War had turned kindness into ammunition. By the time bread ran out and women flooded the streets, the image of the Empress and the dynasty she represented was already beyond saving. By February 1917, Petrograd was starving. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, literally. Bread queues stretched for blocks, flour ran out, coal was scarce, winter bit hard. Women stood in the cold for hours, only to be told there was nothing left. On February 23rd, they'd had enough. The women walked out of the bread lines and into the streets. At first, it wasn't revolutionary. It was practical. Bread, food, something. Workers joined them. Factories shut down. The city slowed, then stopped. Lenin would later mark March 8th as International Women's Day, crediting the women of 1917 with starting the revolution. They are the ones history often forgets. Nicholas was not in the capital that day, again. He was at military headquarters, still convinced the unrest was temporary, another disturbance that firm orders would resolve. He ordered troops to restore order. The troops hesitated. Some fired warning shots, some fired into the air, some refused outright. And then something remarkable happened. The soldiers turned around. They shot their officers, they joined the crowds, they handed out rifles. At that moment, the monarchy lost the army. And when an autocracy loses its army, it loses everything. The Duma begged Nicholas to return. He ignored them. He dismissed reports as exaggerations. He blamed ministers. He delayed. When he finally attempted to return to Petrograd, not due to the unrest in the capital, but due to his children falling ill with measles, revolutionaries stopped his train. Rails blocked, lines cut, orders ignored. Nicholas was stranded. His generals gathered around him, men who had once sworn absolute loyalty. They told him the truth. The capital was lost. The army would not fire. The monarchy could not survive. Nicholas did not argue. He did not rage. He did not threaten. He listened, quietly. And then he abdicated. At first, he abdicated in favor of his son. Then, realizing Alexei's illness made that impossible, he abdicated for both of them, handing the throne instead to his brother, Grand Duke Michael. Michael refused it the next day. After 304 years, the Romanov dynasty ended not with a battle, but with a signature. Nicholas reportedly said nothing. One minister later recalled that he simply murmured, "The Ides of March," a line borrowed from Shakespeare, the day Caesar is betrayed by those sworn to him. Because even now, Nicholas was more comfortable with symbolism than reality. The former Tsar returned to his family, not as a ruler, but a prisoner. The Romanovs were arrested without drama. No chains, no shouting, no crowd. Just paperwork. Nicholas returned to his family not as Tsar, but as Citizen Romanov, a title that felt theoretical at best. The provisional government placed them under house arrest at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo. The guards were polite. The atmosphere was tense but restrained. At first, it almost felt survivable. The children were told the truth carefully. There were tears, there was confusion, and then there was a choice. Nicholas and Alexandra were the prisoners, the children were not. They were offered the chance to leave. They didn't. Not Olga, not Tatiana, not Maria, not Anastasia, not Alexei. They chose each other. Loyal servants did the same. Doctors, tutors, maids, staying not because the Romanovs were good rulers, but because they were good people. History is cruel like that. Nicholas chopped wood. Alexandra sewed. The girls scrubbed floors and washed dishes. They read. They played cards. They attended church. But outside the palace gates, the world was collapsing. Nicholas was not stupid. He understood how dire the situation had become long before the crown was taken from him. What he did not understand, or could not accept, was how to share that knowledge. He could not confide in Alexandra. He did not trust his ministers. And so, increasingly during the war, he did what he had done for years. He confided in his eldest child. Olga listened. What Nicholas told her is unknown, but whatever it was, combined with months spent nursing shattered bodies, witnessing the physical cost of war, and carrying truths her father could not bear to speak aloud, it broke something in her. At some point before the end, Olga suffered a severe emotional collapse. One account describes her seizing an umbrella and smashing windows, screaming until she had to be restrained. It was not hysteria. It was exhaustion. A young woman carrying the weight of war, grief, and a father who had nowhere else to put his fear. The provisional government, meanwhile, proved spectacularly unfit for purpose. They argued, they delayed, they promised reform, and then, fatally, they refused to leave the war. Bread shortages continued. The army continued to rot. The people continued to radicalize. There were questions on what to do with the family. They couldn't stay in the palace forever. Then came an offer too good to be true. Britain. King George V, Georgie, Nicholas's cousin, his closest family ally and friend, initially agreed to offer asylum. Then, just like that, the offer was withdrawn. Officially, it was a matter of logistics. Unofficially, George feared that sheltering a fallen autocrat might endanger his own throne. And so, Nicholas learned, far too late, that family meant very little once crowns began to wobble. With nowhere else to send them, the provisional government decided to move the family east, to Tobolsk, Siberia. The journey was long, the destination was isolating. But in Tobolsk, life briefly softened. The guards were less hostile. The family gardened, taught lessons, celebrated holidays. For a moment, it seemed possible they might simply disappear into obscurity. That illusion didn't last, because while the provisional government hesitated, Vladimir Lenin did not. He returned from exile and might have taken carpe diem a little too seriously. Seize the day he did. October 1917, the Bolsheviks take power. The provisional government collapses almost overnight. A government so temporary it barely had time to leave a footprint, and the Romanovs immediately felt the difference. The tone changed, the guards changed, the rules hardened. The family realized very quickly that the Bolsheviks were not interested in mercy, compromise, or exile. They were interested in finality. The Romanovs were moved once more, this time to Yekaterinburg, to a house ominously renamed the House of Special Purpose. The family was separated, briefly. When the order was given to move them, Nicholas, Alexandra, and Maria were taken ahead with their guards. Olga, Tatiana, Anastasia, and a dangerously ill Alexei were left behind for several weeks, waiting until the boy was strong enough to survive the journey. It was the last time they would ever be apart. When they were reunited in Yekaterinburg, the atmosphere had changed. The guards were harsher, the rules tighter, the future no longer discussed, but clearly understood. The family had always been bilingual. Now it became a shield. They spoke English to one another, so the guards could not understand. Whatever was said in those final months shook the girls. Anastasia and Maria burned their diaries and letters, destroying their own words rather than allowing them to be taken or read. Very little would survive. Despite everything, the war, the abdication, the imprisonment, and her earlier collapse, Olga once again became the person her father confided in. So Nicholas again did what he had done for years. He spoke to his eldest child. What they discussed is unknown, but Olga left behind one final message. It was not angry, it was not political, it was not bitter. It read, "Father asks me to tell all who have remained loyal to him that they should not avenge him, for he has forgiven everyone and prays for them all. That they should remember that the evil that is now in the world will become yet more powerful, and that it is not evil that will conquer evil, only love." She ended simply, "Give my love to all who remember me." If this was Nicholas's final instruction to his daughter, then the ending had already been spoiled. Beyond Russia's borders, unease was spreading in places that mattered: Britain, France, Germany. In London, British officials finally began discussing an escape plan, but it was too little, too late. Inquiries were made, diplomatic questions asked, Moscow responded. Until one morning, they didn't. By July 1918, the situation had become urgent. The Civil War was raging. The White Army, anti-Bolshevik forces, were advancing toward Yekaterinburg. If they reached the city, the imperial family could be rescued. Lenin could not allow that. There had been discussion in Moscow, a trial perhaps, like the French Revolution had done with Louis XVI. But a trial required a defense, and a defense risked sympathy, and sympathy was dangerous. Nicholas could not be allowed to look innocent, so the decision was made, quietly, efficiently, without paperwork. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, the prisoners were woken and told they were being moved for their safety. They were instructed to dress quickly. Nicholas carried Alexei, weak from a recent hemophilia attack, down to the basement of the house. The family was told to line up while preparations were made. Chairs were brought for Alexandra and Alexei. They waited. Then the door opened. The commandant, Yakov Yurovsky, stepped forward and read from a prepared statement. Nikolai Alexandrovich, in view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. Nicholas turned toward him, confused. What? What? He said. Some accounts claim that as he turned back toward his family, he murmured words attributed to Christ himself. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If he did say it, it was painfully on brand. Nicholas had always believed himself chosen by God, not to rule decisively, but to endure. Yurovsky fired. The bullet struck Nicholas in the chest. He died almost instantly. What followed was chaos. The execution squad opened fire in a confined room. Smoke filled the air. Bullets ricocheted. Screams echoed off the walls. Alexandra was killed almost immediately. Alexei was shot and stabbed, and still did not die right away. And then the horrifying truth became clear. The daughters were not dying. The Grand Duchesses had sewn diamonds and jewels into their corsets, hiding them from guards. The gemstones acted like crude armor. Bullets bounced. Shots failed. The executioners panicked. They used bayonets, pistol butts, knives. It was brutal, clumsy, prolonged. One of the girls, believed to be Maria, either groaned or sat up in the truck afterward. A guard, terrified, beat and shot her again to finish it. By the time it ended, 11 people were dead. Not just royalty. Dr. Eugene Botkin, Anna Demidova, Ivan Kharitonov, Alexei Troop, a physician, a lady's maid, a cook, a footman, people who had chosen to stay. The bodies were loaded onto a truck and driven into the forest. What happened next was less execution and more farce. The disposal was mishandled from the start. The bodies were dumped in a forest outside Yekaterinburg. They tried to burn them. It failed. They tried to dissolve them with acid. It didn't work properly. Eventually, they buried 9 bodies together under a road. 2, Alexei and one of the daughters, were buried separately, to confuse anyone searching for a single grave. This mistake would matter, because back in Moscow, the Bolsheviks lied. They announced Nicholas had been executed. They claimed the family had been moved to safety. Lenin personally approved the silence. Whenever foreign governments inquired, Britain, France, Germany, Moscow had always responded. Until that morning. Germany, which had secretly helped fund the Bolsheviks earlier in the war, asked that the princesses with German blood be sent to Berlin. Lenin refused. The truth vanished behind closed borders, sealed archives, and fear. Other Romanovs were murdered too. Nicholas's brother, Michael Alexandrovich, in whose favor Nicholas had abdicated and who refused the throne the following day, was murdered in June 1918. He was taken into the woods near Perm and shot at close range, his body left where it fell. His sister-in-law would face a similar end. Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna, Alexandra's sister, had already renounced court life. After her husband and Nicholas's uncle, Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich, was assassinated, she became a nun. In July 1918, Elizabeth was beaten and thrown alive into a mine shaft with 7 other members of the Romanov circle. Grenades were hurled down after them. According to multiple accounts, Elizabeth sang hymns in the darkness and attempted to tend the wounded, until her own injuries claimed her. One by one, the dynasty was erased. But secrecy has consequences, because when you hide bodies, you create ghosts. Imposters emerged across Europe, women claiming to be survivors. Most were exposed quickly. One was not. One woman would convince much of the world that Anastasia had lived. That lie would endure for decades. But that's a story for another time. Science eventually intervened. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the main grave was exhumed in 1991. DNA testing confirmed the remains of Nicholas II, Alexandra Fyodorovna, and 3 of their daughters. The mystery lingered. Where were the other 2? For a short while, hope for a happier ending stayed alive. Then, in 2007, a second grave was found nearby. DNA confirmed it. Alexei Nikolaevich, and Maria Nikolaevna. None escaped. In 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonized Nicholas II, Alexandra, and their children, not as martyrs of politics, not as rulers, but as passion-bearers, a specific category of sainthood reserved for those who face suffering and death with humility, forgiveness, and faith. They were not sainted for how they ruled. They were sainted for how they died. For Nicholas, this would have made perfect sense. He had never believed his role was to change history, only to endure it, to suffer quietly, to accept, to submit. In that sense, Abel's prophecy closed its circle. The Tsar who would trade his crown for a crown of thorns did exactly that. History had judged Nicholas II a failure as a ruler. Faith judged him something else entirely. Canonization did not erase the famines, the strikes, the crushed protests, or the millions lost to war under his reign. It did not absolve his indecision, his recklessness, or his refusal to act when action mattered. Nicholas II was not executed because he was innocent. He was executed because the broken system he inherited and failed to control collapsed around him while he stood and watched. The children, however, were another matter. They had ruled nothing, ordered nothing, decided nothing. They were guilty only of being born Romanov. If sainthood applied anywhere without complication, it was there. The Romanov dynasty began in 1613 with a terrified teenager hiding in a monastery and ended in 1918 with a terrified family in a cellar. No crowns, no ceremony, no mercy, just bullets, silence, and a lie that took a century to undo.